Webcam microphone up close. Webcam microphone up close.
At the age of 19 in 1962, she was
See, but I have the files. You know, I read this stuff at the National Archives, and I read these other things. I said to myself, how can that be possible? The brain, you know, pistols and the frontal slab of choice. I don't know computers, doesn't really matter. Internet, professional wrestlers, and not Jesse Ventura style. It doesn't matter where the cartoon comes from as long as it's real. It doesn't. It's hard to get real information because seriously, they don't want you to just read two sources whenever I try to prove out one of these. It's not. You expect your government to tell you the truth, you're going to sadly disappoint another one of these things.
Dear Lord, what a dirty, dirty old man, huh?
Really can't be serious. Is this really want things to be more hooker, eruptions, whatever. Really?
Allegedly broadcast live from Pima Region 2. Within the borders of the formerly united and currently occupied states of America, we bring you the Ochelli Effect.
I damn sure know I'm an original. We have all these situations. I'd love to know why it takes 50 years, for
that's that.
Oh boy, and all that noise in my headphones means that it is Saturday night on UCY.TV radio. And tonight I have something completely unique, something completely unrehearsed, and I guarantee you will not fit with any of the shows I have done previously. That's all I can guarantee you. Tonight we have the person that I bet you can find anywhere on the internet under the moniker The Mouth That Roars, somebody who I have appreciated for many years and have never had the opportunity to actually have a conversation with, and I'm going to share that conversation with you guys tonight live. Ms. Maria Heller. How you doing tonight, Maria?
I'm doing great, Charles. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, absolutely. I have some people may be aware of Maria via the Jack Blood Show, which is also on this network, and you may be aware of Maria many other ways. And in fact, if you've gone through the archives of some other people's interesting sort of forays into talk radio over the past 15 years, you can find her scattered all over the place, and I definitely assure you that you will not find another voice like her. So, let us begin.
Thanks for that. I was surfing through your site and I saw that they do a lot of reruns of Mae Brussel. And years ago, somebody had asked me if I ever heard of Mae Brussel, and at the time I hadn't. And I went looking for her and I started listening to her, and it really freaked me out because she was so similar to me that I couldn't listen to her.
Well, Mae was somebody that I had a deep appreciation for over the years, and I used to be able to get her on cassette tapes, actually, a long time ago. And these things were distributed long before the internet became prominent in people's lives, and we used to be able to sort of trade these shows kind of quietly amongst ourselves because she was in Carmel, California. And I know that there are people that criticize Mae because of some of her focuses and all that, but let me tell you something. She was working without a net, without an internet, and without a whole lot of the networks that so many of us have grown to rely upon in order to gather our information. And it's really a remarkable thing what she did, and I can definitely see the parallel between the two of you.
I know, it was very freaky to me. So I was like, I'm freaking out now. I have to shut this down.
Yeah, but, one thing you could say about Mae, regardless of, like I said, regardless of what you think she unearthed or did not unearth, is that she was definitely a one-of-a-kind individual, and that, at the very least, is something that all of us can appreciate. At least, the people that listen to me, I know, appreciate individuals who are not quite cut from the same cloth as everybody else. So, in that sort of vein, I gotta say, that when I take a listen to just at random, what has been one of the major topics that has come up recently, because you do newscasts all the time, what has been one of the things that you've been focusing on lately?
Well, one of the things I've been focusing on is the militarized police state in America. I think that that's a huge story. And yet most Americans, get all riled up over what I consider insignificant stories.
Yeah, I mean, they're too busy chasing what kind of technology is searching for a plane out by, out somewhere near Australia, although most of them couldn't even find Australia on a map.
Right.
I found that pretty fascinating too with the whole Ukraine thing, which is something to be kept, to be kept on the radar of those of us who care about what's going to happen in the world. The entire Ukraine crisis has been, relatively, I don't know what to call it at this point. I mean, it's so propagandized that, the truth about it is almost impossible to discern. But at the same time, I saw one of those studies in the mainstream because I do extract some of this stuff to try and analyze the realities. They had a whole thing about how most Americans who were quite in support of the idea of military intervention had no clue, absolutely no clue, where the Ukraine was. I mean, they were placing it in the ocean, in parts of the continental United States, all kinds of places. Did you see that?
Yeah, it's pretty sad. I mean, the level of education in our society is very sad. And I mean, the rest of the world knows something America doesn't know. Is that we live under the greatest psyop in the world. We only know about our country, if that, and we don't care about other countries. So, when you look at what Putin did in Crimea, what's different between that and what, our government's been doing since, for hundreds of years?
Well, absolutely. I mean, imperialism is imperialism, no matter the color of the flag. And, the concept that right under our nose, like you said, locally, the militarization of what should be a peacekeeping, civil force, or police state as it is being ratcheted up. I mean, ever so quietly, it seems to me, because no one is focusing on that except the occasional blip that you get from, some outrage when there's just a cold-blooded murder by some of these guys who are, quite jacked up and, been given all kinds of extra sort of training that is really not required in civilian law enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the Kelly Thomas story and the recent story in where was it, Albuquerque, where there was some outrage by the public and all that. I mean, but it's still rather underreported on a daily basis. I bet you that if you really had a good barometer about every single one of the 50 states in this union, you could find no less than 50 of these things a week that are completely outrageous and morally just repulsive.
Absolutely. And I report those stories all the time because I think it's important. I think, since 9/11, police in this country have killed something like 5,800 Americans. So nobody's talking about that. Well, I think that that's important to talk about. I think everything from the Patriot Act to the NDAA are important to talk about. But Americans want to just start waving their made in China flag over, insignificant, retarded things. I look at it and I'm like, oh my God. So, I got to tell you, my own opinion is as a race, a human race, we're not evolving. It seems like we're devolving.
I really, I have no argument with what you're saying. How can I? I mean, I'm trying to walk through the world with my eyes open, and this is what presents itself to me. It's unfortunate, but it is the reality of things. And, it is certainly not the country that we were, taught as children we were supposed to have been born into. And it's certainly not even the world at this point that, we were taught that we were born into.
No, it's unrecognizable. We get to learn about the American creed, and we have it pounded in our heads from when we start school, that we're the greatest, liberty, justice, equality for all, men are all created equal. But we haven't lived up to our creed in years, and we're so far removed from it today that it's just words without meaning.
Right, but it is notable, though, that there was a serious shift after 9/11, and I think that is also rather downplayed by your mainstream historians or even the mainstream so-called journalists. As some people are fond of calling them, the prostitute media that occurs, that actually is sort of omnipresent in the electronic stream. You know, and it's just, I am almost dumbfounded by it. I mean, at the time that 9/11 occurred, I've got to make an honest confession here that I was quite still swept up in the foolishness of believing that we had been unjustly attacked. And I mean to tell you that regardless of what you believe about who actually attacked us on that day, here's what we can agree is that a terrorist operation did occur and was introduced into the social psychological stream of consciousness for the entire world that day, and more specifically and more intensely on the American people. So there's no way to argue with that, regardless of what version of events you may happen to subscribe to, I think.
Absolutely. And the truth of the matter is, you know, even when I continually cover 9/11 on my show, and people are like, Maria, why don't you just get over it? And I'm like, because we're living in a post 9/11 world. And until we get the truth on 9/11, nothing is going to change back to better times. Absolutely nothing. The militarized police state is only going to get worse. So you got to look at 9/11 and say, well, who benefited? And it wasn't just Lucky Larry. Okay. Mm-hmm. A lot of people benefited. The war machine especially benefited. The maniacs behind Project for a New American Century got the war they wanted. You know, the pharmaceutical industry, you know, that was a big boom for them because now we're growing more poppies in Afghanistan than the Taliban was growing. So you have to look at, you know, who benefited. Certainly not the American people, Charles. I tell people all the time, 9/11 happened and we all got convicted.
There's no better way to put that. And, you know, I had recently had Douglas Valentine on. We were discussing how intermingled the drug policies and the enforcement end of it, domestically, and how the foreign policies and the intelligence agencies were all intermingled in this stuff. And, you know, it is kind of difficult to really comprehend, to actually wrap your mind around the levels of the onion here. You know, and it's just, it's almost, I don't know how to put it. I mean, outside of saying that it's, you know, beyond the quantity of infinity, it seems to me.
That's a good way to put it. That's a good way to put it. You know, when you look at it, you know, I had a story this morning. I posted it on my Facebook page, where some guy got busted with 2 joints of marijuana and he got 13 years in prison. Now you got to understand, it cost us a minimum of $40,000 a year in taxpayer money for everybody rotting in jail. And does the punishment fit the crime? No. Is it a crime? Shouldn't be. But you have the CIA bringing in all these drugs. Now their new import is heroin, which is the new supposed epidemic in America. And, you know, nobody's going to jail there.
Well, right. And I was discussing the ebb and flow of this the other night, and I'll repeat it again. You know, if you really think about it, and I just put it in the context of my own lifetime, because I was actually born at the beginning of the 70s. I'm a little bit younger than you. And
like a kid's age.
Well, what can I say?
Okay, that helps me understand you.
So here's the thing, being a toddler, a baby in the time at the conclusion, the so-called conclusion of the Vietnam conflict, and understanding that at that time the inner city epidemic was heroin, and then as the access points were sort of closed off by the war machine, because this is all interrelated. When the access points were closed off by the lack of activity in that part of the world near the Golden Triangle and all that, then all of a sudden we seem to have an influx of cocaine in this country. So the illicit drug, which became prominent, was cocaine, and the reason why is because now we were participating more in adventures in South America, where it was a whole lot easier to cultivate the cocoa plants for cocaine processing. Mm-hmm. So as that evolved, and as we discovered later on, we were involved in all these adventures, intelligence, military, political, as far as the Contras and these death squads and the horrendous, still untold atrocities in Central and South America. As that stuff evolved and then sort of got quashed again, there started up another sort of homegrown what they call the era of designer drugs. And I know you can remember that, but a lot of my listeners don't. And the era of designer drugs was to, again, make it easier. But in the process of sort of exculpating ourselves from that situation in South America and Central America, the crack cocaine epidemic came in because it was a more efficient way of distributing the stuff that was being cultivated in South America. Then that distribution collapses. And of course, and I'm, sort of capsulizing all this without giving a lot of detail, but I'm giving you a clue as to why these epidemics rise and fall. The military access, it goes hand in hand with the drug access, which goes hand in hand with the intelligence access, which goes hand in hand with every single level of corruption that you could possibly imagine throughout our very, very sick system at this point, which is systemically so diseased with this kind of stuff that it's again unrecognizable. So why did heroin make a comeback? Well, if you take a look at when heroin really started to make its comeback as the epidemic drug, it's post 9/11. Why is it post 9/11? Were we just so depressed that we needed to be able to get ourselves some horse in order to deal with it all? No. But again, we have the military and making its excursions into a part of the world where the poppy is easy to cultivate, is plentiful, and is in fact a bumper cash crop on a local level, so it could be exploited again and introduced not only into the stream as an illicit drug, as one of these other sort of imports of black market sort of means, but also for the pharmaceutical companies to be able to have easy and cheap access to keep pumping out all of their derivative types of medicine based on this stuff. Mm-hmm. And if you watch it, it all just flows together perfectly. This is not a storyline I've created. This is the reality of the flow.
Well, and you got to look at, too, that the biggest killer, I think it's the second biggest killer of Americans, are pharmaceutical drugs. So now you have a society where everybody's popping pills, all kinds of pills, and everybody wants an instant fix. So I often, think about Huxley's book, Brave New World. And it seems like so many people are on antidepressants of some sort or the other that indeed became the Soma pill that he wrote about.
In fact, there's even a pill which is called Soma, which is now distributed for people to remain calm while they're uncomfortable. Literally, that is the name of one of those pharmaceuticals that they use.
I know, it's ridiculous. I had a story last week on one of my news shows that they now want to say that daydreaming is a disease, and they're trying to get it approved for people to go on more antidepressants and psychotropic drugs for daydreaming. So any kind of free thinking is being squashed through pharmaceuticals, through the mainstream media, and through our system of education, which is anything but education.
Right, and also trying to reach into the youth a lot earlier now. And I know, again, we can put this in context, but there was a time period when these psychotropic drugs were being introduced into the population. There was a time when they would state that, look, children should not take this stuff because their brains are not developed yet. Seems to be a very sensible thing to say, doesn't it, Maria?
Of course, and they were never tested on people under 18, and now they're putting toddlers on the drugs.
Exactly.
So now childhood is now a disease.
Childhood is a disease. The uniqueness of character, free thought is a disease. What isn't a disease, Maria? I mean, do you have any clue? Because I've lost track here.
No, I guess just being part of the zombie apocalypse is probably not a disease.
Well, I don't even see how, because it just seems as though there is no escape from disease. If you think about it, I mean, just take any single individual that you can fit them into a category at this point. I mean, whether it's the mild sort of, spectrum of what they used to call autism, which they've expanded as a political mechanism and also as a big helper to Big Pharma, in my opinion. Mm. But if you just take a look at that spectrum, and then you imagine the idea of, the sort of classification and overabundance of forms of depression and styles in which someone can be classified. I mean, it just seems to me as though there is not a single one of us, even those who have their heads fully immersed into their backsides, they even seem to have diseases too. I mean, there is no escape from disease in my estimation.
Well, I can tell you this. I'm old enough to be your mother. Okay. And I don't have any disease. I'm not on any medication. I've learned so much in the years of doing my show on how to stay healthy, and I could give you some clues if you'd like. One is, eat organic food. Don't eat anything packaged. Stay away from the meat and dairy industry, which is deliberately poisoning everybody in this country. Exercise. I go to the gym 6 days a week. I drink purified water. I keep myself busy and happy. Okay. I have friends, and I'm not depressed. Once in a while you might feel a little sad, but now all of a sudden even that is a disease. And when I look at my peers, I have to tell you, it scares the hell out of me. Because I look at them and I'm like, you're my age, and they already have one foot in the grave. And they're on a minimum, 6 to 10 different prescription drugs. And I watch their diet and I look at their aura. Their skin looks gray to me. But people have to get, this has all been done deliberately to the masses through genetically modified food, through the vaccine programs, through spraying chemicals in the air every single day, chemicals in the water, fluoride in the water. And of course, advertising, every pill known to man. That's all that TV commercials seem to be is, you got this disease, you got to ask your doctor for that pill. When I go to a doctor for a checkup, which is the only time I go, they ask, what pharmaceuticals, what drugs are you on? And I said none. And they asked me 3 times because they can't even hear that somebody my age is not taking any drugs. So you can be disease-free and you can be healthy. It's not that hard. You got to live the way my grandparents did.
Right, and that's exactly what I was coming to because, another aspect of what you do is actually consulting people and things like this about how to live healthier in a holistic sense, which is, it does include the diet and trying to avoid the chemical industrial complex, as it were.
Absolutely.
And it does involve, what you put into something is what you get out of it. So you should really be very conscious of the types of foods. I really feel terrible for some of the stuff that I fed my children when they were babies at this point because I was so uneducated about this stuff. And as some people know, I'm about to have another one. And I've been talking recently about coming up with my own formulas for creating baby foods out of just natural elements instead of buying any of this packaged crap, because I want to give him at least a better start.
Right. Well, that's a great idea. And there are a lot of books out on how not to get your child vaccinated. So that's something you and your wife are going to have to make a decision about. Do you want to get your kid vaccinated? Now I think within the first 2 years, they've given kids something like 36 different vaccinations. So that's a tough one. A lot of people are making their own organic baby food. If your wife's going to breastfeed, she's got to learn what she eats is what that baby's eating. Now we're moving into a period where they're criminalizing pregnant women. If God forbid, you took a drug or whatever while you were pregnant, you can end up going to jail if you're breastfeeding your kid, but they don't ever include Monsanto's products going into your child when you're breastfeeding or, fluoride from the water you're mixing your formula with. It's a crazy world we live in. When I look at the time period from when I raised my kids, my oldest is 41, and I look at just one lifetime, how things have changed and for the worse. It frightens me. I worry about the future for my grandchildren.
Right, and that's exactly the spot I'm in. Oddly, I'm only 1 year older than your oldest, so
Right.
this is the perspective I am talking to you from, and it is absolutely abominable to look at it. It's like it's okay to poison your children so long as you use our poisons.
Exactly. And, just to give you some perspective with some of the other things we were talking about, I grew up in New York City. And we're looking at, I went through elementary school in the 50s, happy days, high school in the 60s. I was around with the civil rights riots going on in my neighborhood. I've lived through all those assassinations as pretty much an adult. I mean, I was 13 when Kennedy was shot. I was, of conscious mind when Bobby Kennedy was shot, when Martin Luther King was shot. I lived through the, tune in, tune out, Timothy Leary, who I believe was a CIA plant to kill the anti-war movement by turning kids on to drugs. But because of my own keen intuition, I could always see through those stories, even when I was a kid. When I remember when Kennedy was shot, I was watching Lyndon Johnson get sworn in, and I knew he was involved. Nobody had to tell me that. So years and years later, who would have thought that I'd be interviewing all these Kennedy experts who would agree with what a 13-year-old kid could see very clearly off the TV screen? But that was the beginning of mind control through television, because they repeated the same thing over and over and over again, just like they did on 9/11. So I'm very hep to the way they run their modus operandi on all of us.
Right. And I had to observe those newscasts later, and I went through a great deal of trouble to collect them. But you're dead on with that, because they continuously repeated these things, regardless of the facts. It was the day actually, for my listeners, it was actually the first day that news went to a 24-hour cycle. It was the day that the electronic media stopped running commercials and just pumped news at you all day, or at least what they were calling news. And it was just the repetition of the, of sort of the company line. And my revelation about that really began when I was a school-age child, and I was in about, I think, the second grade, and they just briefly sort of discussed this, and I stopped the class, and I said, wait a minute, you're telling me that the guy who supposedly shot the president was then shot while in the custody of the police?
Right. They wanted us to believe all that. But you know what? Because most people are lazy and they trust their government, like it's a god or something, they never have to change their MO, because it works every time. It's really like a sleight of hand. You watch it and I sit back and laugh. I immediately question a story when it comes out, and then my listeners are so used to it now. They've learned how to pick the story apart. They can pick it apart as fast as I can now.
Yeah, well, that's what I've been, really focused on most of the time, is the sort of analytical side of this, because it is not worth, paying attention to this stuff other than to try and extract the reality, from the fantasy, you know.
Right, but you know what? When I see those stories, Charles, and they start breaking, you know what? I get a feeling of dread. And the only reason I get the feeling of dread is, now I have to tear apart this story too. It's not like anybody else. To me, I just see it as more homework. Okay. It's like, oh God, now I have to rip this apart, like the Boston bombing. Okay. I mean, people really got to open their eyes in this country, because that was, right in your face. We're shutting down the whole city. We're shutting off everybody's cell phones. Well, why would they shut off everybody's cell phones when an emergency is going on? Because if they can kill your phone, you can't take pictures.
Right. And also you can't communicate with anybody else and let anything get out before they can contain it themselves on the ground.
Exactly.
This is another purpose. Yeah. Every time one of these things happens, and that's why I'm starting to really get a serious, sort of knot in my stomach, because I know that there's going to be so much to pull apart with this whole Ukrainian thing. And I've tried to lay off of it because I just knew that there was going to be more propaganda and more nonsense, and it was just a question of which playbook are they going to take off of the shelf. And then when I realized that they were going to start to ratchet up the fear of the rise of the Third Reich in Russia as part of the narrative, it was like, oh no, you guys are going to give me weeks worth of work to try and sit here and dissect this nonsense. You know what I mean? And I just...
Well, I mean, look, they want to push for World War III. And while everybody was looking at, the missing plane, which is a joke in itself, okay, you can't lose a plane in 2014, all right? Not when our government brags that they can read the newspaper you're reading from outer space from a satellite. But I knew that was distraction, and it was 24/7 on TV news, just the missing plane, not the fact that, we're pushing for World War III between us and Russia. And that's how they keep people stupid. All right. Like you said earlier, people don't even know where the Ukraine is. Most people in America don't even know where Mississippi is. Okay. Not that that's any big place to know. You know what I'm saying? But, I always look at what are they not telling us? What story are they covering up with this trite? Okay. And from all the different people that I've talked to about flight MH370, I have to tell you that the only thing that makes sense to me is either we did indeed hijack that plane, or it was another false flag that went awry, or it was legitimately another Philadelphia experiment.
See, I'm more of the opinion that that plane was destroyed, either intentionally or unintentionally. And now it has served its purpose to demonstrate that something that large can be disappeared by whatever means, and it's been slid to somebody as, listen, we can do this to an airliner. I'm very sure we can do this to whatever sort of attack jets or whatever it is you think you have.
Maybe it was some sort of exotic weapon. Okay. We really don't know. I mean, you think about the Philadelphia experiment, which happened like 100 years ago. I mean, Tesla was there. And how far could they come after they murdered him and kept all his notes? Who's to say they can't disappear that? Who's to say they can't disappear a whole city? Right. I used to never be a conspiracy factualist. That's what I call myself. But now, to me, everything our government or media says is a conspiracy unless they prove differently.
And meanwhile, the reality is that most of what they're talking about is a conspiracy, but they want you to buy their conspiracy theory as opposed to any other, because after all, it's much more useful if you can buy their company line because they're directing the whole network. You know what I mean?
Exactly. So, it's really like trying to start looking for a needle in a haystack. You're going to find it. It may take 100 years. You might find it. We still have to wait at least another 10 for the papers on the Kennedy assassination from 1963 to happen. So I've kind of made my grandchildren promise to me that if and when they actually release the proof on 9/11 or any evidence, to just talk to my ghost at that point and let me know.
Yeah, that is definitely something to look at because, even with the push in the mid-90s, after the Oliver Stone film came out, and we did have a great deal of releases, into the National Archives, without comment and without any sort of an effort to investigate. They just simply declassified a bunch of documents and they dumped it on us. There's about 5 million pages they dumped on us all. Those of us who were involved in that research. I got to tell you something else. They turned looking for a needle in a haystack to looking for a needle in a stack of needles.
Mm-hmm.
And,
absolutely.
This is what they usually do when there's some resistance from the public, when we start to stand up and, let me just be blunt. Normally I don't even swear on the air, but I'll tell you something. When we start to call bullshit on them, what happens is they start telling us, oh no, that's not bullshit. This is bullshit. And they dump the real thing on us, which is that stack of needles as opposed to the haystack with the one needle in it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, we get president after president that comes in. It was really just a puppet for the shadow government. And if people don't think there's a shadow government, there's plenty online they can research. Even Bill Moyers did a special, I think in the 70s about the shadow government, the people that really run this country. Mm-hmm. And they all talk about transparency. Well, but every time they give us any kind of paperwork, if they do under Freedom of Information Act, it's always redacted. So you can't really read most of it anyway. Because everything is national security, meaning their security, so that we don't lynch all our politicians.
Right, and even the selection, as it were, of a guy like Barack Obama, which sort of briefly gave some people in this country the idea that there was hope. And I always say that was just the signal to abandon hope and begin to beg for change.
Beg for change is right.
And the reality is this, he was going to do nothing different. And in fact, if you thought we didn't have transparency under guys like W or Bush the First or Clinton, or, hey, let's go back to Reagan, who, in my opinion was extremely asleep at the wheel, but still the same guys were running things. When you go back and you look at all of that, I don't see how it is that anybody could turn around and sort of side with one faction or the other. It's like the two wings, the supposed left and right wings, are actually connected to the same body of fascism, which has risen up in place of what was supposed to be a republic.
Right. Well, we have no republic. We have no democracy. We have no freedom. Okay. Those are just words that no longer have any meaning. And people still repeat the creed, but they haven't got a clue that we don't live by it. Probably never did, but not as bad as today. Because I've done so much reading and research doing my show all these years, I've learned so much, Charles, and a lot of stuff that I didn't want to learn any more than the average American wants to know. But I would say, I remember reading a book about Thomas Jefferson and his quotes, and he was extremely intelligent. He had said that what goes on in the rest of the world was basically none of our business. That, we had enough to take care of inside our own country. And he said if anybody actually wanted our form of democracy, we should lead by example and they would come and ask us for it. Well, needless to say, we go whipping and whomping into any country we feel like. Uprooting their democratically elected leaders, putting in our puppets and throw threats on them through the International Monetary Fund. So we're so far removed from what America was supposed to be or could have been. But people still believe the lies.
Yes, this is without question. And the thing about Thomas Jefferson that I always remember, because I spent so much time on the Kennedy assassination, was that the quote by JFK where he was sitting there among a group of intellectuals dining at the White House. And I'm going to paraphrase here. He basically said that there had not been a more brilliant meeting of minds at a dinner in the White House since Thomas Jefferson had dined there alone. Definitely a guy who had a lot of insight about the future and the realities of things far beyond his own time.
Oh yeah, when you really read and learn the kind of man he was, and of course, the average idiot, the first thing they have to say is, well, he owned slaves. Well, everybody did in those days. Their Bible said it was okay. But when you really see how intelligent he was, and, he had such a deep spirituality. He was not religious, because when they brought the Christian Bible to him and talked to him about a Christian nation, he said, I don't see anything useful about it, which most of our founding fathers agreed with. But he had a vision. He had a vision that we would be the new Atlantics. And, his words were amazing, and when you look at the people that penned the Declaration of Independence, the people that wrote the Constitution, signed on to it, they put everything on the line. It wasn't like today where, politicians just all vote the same way and get paid off by lobbyists. They knew it could cost them their lives, their livelihood, everything, but they did it anyway. I don't think Americans today have that spirit.
No, they definitely don't. And, about Thomas Jefferson and his spirituality, at one point I had read a bunch of papers about how he had taken actually one of these Christian Bibles and re-edited it by hand. Mm-hmm. And actually had removed a lot of what he considered to be the superfluous parts of it, and sort of re-edited it into a more concise, usable kind of document. I found that really fascinating, because, it's easy to scoff at a lot of the, a lot of the sort of systems that have developed out of the religious persuasions. But a lot of them are interrelated. A lot of them are based on one another. And in fact, if you look at the sort of harmony between a lot of them, the moral characteristics that are there to begin with are really always interfered with by the politics of the writers, by the politics of the editors, and the politics of the time of the release of the documents.
Absolutely. It's like that saying, history is always written by the victors.
Right. And there is no more, I mean, people take that at face value, but I don't think they actually examine the true meaning of that. Only the victor's history shall survive is really what should be said there, because attempting to sort of judge things based on the remaining documents that are allowed to exist. I mean, we've all known of the stories of the burning of the libraries of Alexandria. I mean, this is definitely not something that is a small issue when you're looking at the history of any event. And think about this, when they write the history of the times we live in now, I wonder often how historians will actually treat us after that old adage about the 75 years of perspective that French historians used to say had to be applied to any historical event. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you consider that, I mean, how sort of dismayed are you about how history is going to view people 75 years from now, if the species even does survive this?
Exactly. Well, that's the other big if. But, I've said it for years. I said, I hope sometime in the future somebody has put a time capsule together with the past 15 years of my shows, giving people the true story of what was happening since, 2000. Because somebody should just leave it in a time capsule for future generations. But, for me, I look at especially the biggest story on Earth right now, Fukushima, that no one wants to cover, and I cover it daily. We're all it's like a silent nuclear war that's killing us all. Okay, it's slowly killing all life on Earth. They've done nothing to stop the flow. And I worry, if anybody's alive, 20 years from now, how will they even understand all the nuclear waste that we have markings on that's supposed to be so terrible? How will they even know what it is if anybody even can survive? But there's a story a lot of people aren't touching because everybody was, looking at the plane. Well, how about hundreds of tons of radioactive water pouring into the Pacific every day, let alone into our air, our soil, and our food?
Well, you know what it is to me is that it's been conditioned within the populace to sort of accept these things. I mean, after all, no one ever even blinks at the idea that there was open air nuclear testing, that there was underground nuclear testing, mm-hmm. that there were all these other spills and events that have occurred. I mean, Chernobyl would be one of the more noticeable ones in our recent history, but there was tons of testing and dumping and sort of really I don't know how to exactly verbalize this, but it just brazen disregard for the future of biology in general was definitely displayed here by the exacerbation of this, nuclear planet now.
Absolutely. When I was a kid, so again, I'm dating myself, but I guess I'm like living history. When I was a kid, maybe around 10 years old, so it was probably around 1960, in a very crowded neighborhood in Brooklyn, New York, we only heard of one person that had cancer. One, okay? Millions of people, okay? One. And in those days, cancer was like a mystery. And, everybody whispered about the person. Everybody tried to care for the person. But it was almost like it was a shock, like when people first found out about AIDS. And there was only one man in the whole neighborhood that had had a heart attack and died. Okay. Now I go from when I was 10 to 50 years later, and it's like, it seems to me 3 out of 5 people have some form of cancer. And I know very few people that don't have heart or blood pressure problems. So like you said earlier, it's impossible to live without a disease, and it surely seems that way. And just my lifetime, what I have seen, and it certainly are, even though, the benefit of today is in evolution is we have technology we didn't have when we were younger. But that's the only plus. Everything else suffered. Our lifestyle suffered. Our income has suffered. Our family unit has suffered. Everything that was beautiful to me as a kid has been destroyed. And, just so people could have, cell phones and computers. Not worth the trade.
Right. And the technological terror that has sort of risen up across the entire biosphere at this point, in reality, though, to me, it is not a shock, and it hasn't been traded off. It seems to be, again, running quite parallel with the poisoning of the entire system. In other words, like the technology becomes more prolific, so does the disease. So does the stupefying effects of the programming that is on the psychological level. So does the sort of capping off of the spiritual being, the separation and the creation of the supernatural ideal, as opposed to accepting spirituality as part of nature. And it is not any more supernatural than two things rubbing together quickly enough to create fire. This is something that has been lost.
Absolutely. But it doesn't, just because we've lost it doesn't mean we can't regain it. And I often tell my listeners, the only ticket out of here is the spiritual one. Because they're always asking me, how is it you don't freak out? And, I get depressed listening to the news. This world is so messed up, blah, blah, blah. And I just tell them, if you can really understand that you're not a human being trying to be spiritual, but you're a spiritual being having a human experience, you don't overreact to this. Like you said, people think it's a supernatural thing to coexist with nature. My teacher, who was Ojibwa Indian, he had said, because his gift was making it rain. Okay. This guy used to get called around the world wherever they were having drought, and his name was Sun Bear. And when he used to bring the rain, people would think he was doing something supernatural. And he says it's not supernatural. It used to be very natural for all people to communicate with the clouds and the ocean and the trees and the animals. He says, but now they've taken us so far away from nature that we think it's supernatural to be able to do those things.
This is true. And I think that one of the most terrible consequences of this fictitious sort of society, which has sprung up around, again, these technologies, these constructs, these poisons, one of the most terrible sort of consequences, in my opinion, is the separation of us from each other as well. I think that although we are able to communicate at lightning speed and we can speak to someone on the other side of the globe, we are completely not integrated with one another on the most basic level anymore. And this has been to the detriment of all of us, I believe.
Well, but this was all planned. It's a way of isolating us as humans. And, a lot of people really die of loneliness. There's so many test studies, especially with older people, that they say if you have friends and you're not lonely, you live longer. But think about technology. When the online community first began, I want to say maybe 15 years ago, people would talk to people in chat rooms and all this stuff. You had online dating, all that kind of stuff. But to me, the purpose was, okay, if I started chatting with you online and we have things in common, I want to meet you in person. Mm-hmm. But people somewhere along the line lost that meet somebody in person. I mean, people are having sex on their computer, okay? They live in this village called Second Life, where they have a better life in their make-believe world online than they do in their real life, okay? And when I look at how isolated people have become, even looking at people in restaurants, they're probably out on a date and both people are sitting there texting somebody else on their cell phone. No one is fully present anymore. So we become a nation of Pavlov's dogs, just totally addicted and controlled by our gadgets. The next step that they have planned for us is to integrate computers into the human body, to make us a mutation of, part human, part computer, until eventually, the computer wins. I don't know if you've ever interviewed Daniel Estulin, but he's got a great new book out. I think it's called Transevolution, where he tells you this is their plan. It's like this new movie Transcendence, which I haven't seen yet with Johnny Depp, but I will, because it's everything that I discussed with Daniel Estulin, and he's got the patents and everything quoted in his book. This is what DARPA has planned for us. So you've got to look at what is the end game? What is it that they want? Well, they want us basically to be robots, machines, just serving the elite. And they want most of the planet's resources for themselves, which means they've got to get rid of a whole lot of people.
Yeah, this is true in one way or another. And I brought up that movie Transcendence on my broadcast, and I was exactly thinking that before you mentioned it. And Estulin does come to mind. I haven't interviewed him myself yet. But,
well, definitely get his book Transevolution, because it'll blow your mind.
Well, you know what did blow my mind previous to that, and I'm sure. I mean, I've only seen him speak about certain things and watched him sort of interact with the press about certain things, and watch the way he was sort of treated and marginalized by some, and thought it was really unfair, because I couldn't find a logical flaw with any of the things that he was expounding upon. But
Right.
The thing is this, I read a book, and I have to say that it's at least 10 years ago, that sounds almost exactly like what I'm looking at with that movie Transcendence. It was a novel, but it was, eerily similar, where someone winds up working on this project. They're downloaded into a computer. This is not a brand new idea, but
Right.
The actual realities that were contained within that novel were extremely disturbing to me, because I said to myself, this isn't like the movies of the 1960s and 70s, where you had these sort of unrealistic, unbacked up sort of constructs where something just sort of, that just sort of sprung up. So therefore,
Right.
that's what we're doing battle with. This was real in that it really did integrate, the trends of what was occurring, on a biological level, and also on a technological level. And this is long before the real explosion of the internet, long before the real
Right.
explosion of information on DARPA, which is now a bit more easier to access because of this. But even so, it's being confounded again with not only these fictions, some of them, with good intent, some of them just as creative pieces of art. But
Yeah,
it
but
always,
most of it is predictive programming. They tell us in advance what they're going to do.
Yeah,
I'm sure you saw that movie Divergent. Did you see that?
yes.
Well, what is a divergent? You and I would be considered a divergent. We'd be on their hit list because we are free thinkers. We don't fit into a category.
Well, that's precisely where I was going. You keep beating me to everything I want to say.
Sorry. We have a very synchronistic connection.
So strange, because again, I'm gonna just chalk it off to the concept that you and I must have met somewhere before.
Well, listen, I don't believe that any of us meet anybody for the very first time, because I do believe in the eternity of the soul and reincarnation. And if you think about it, I'll just throw this one at you. You can chew this one over for a while when we're done. 7 billion people on the planet. What are the chances of you and I meeting unless we were supposed to?
There you go. Mathematical, see,
Do you know what I'm saying? I don't think I meet anybody for the first time.
No, and you know what? It makes perfect sense. Like when they try and explain to you, look, sometimes, if you see coincidence, and I so don't even want to use the word coincidence anymore, because there's no such thing.
Synchronicity. I like synchronicity.
Exactly. Synergistic reality, or synchronicity, or the simple
Like
ways.
tracks like.
That's it.
Look, my audience, to me, as far as I'm concerned, I tell them all the time, you guys are my soul group. I believe that soul groups reincarnate together as groups. And if you really look at, different historical times, you see that at certain different times, you have very progressive or artistic people come in and out of the human race, and then they're gone for maybe 100, 200, 300 years, and then boom, you have another renaissance. So I don't think that it's accidental, so I don't get butthurt over people that argue what I have to say or don't like my work or whatever, because to me, you're really not part of my soul group, so I don't really care what you have to say. Okay, I don't even know what planet some of these people are from, but I know they're not from my home planet. I think there are a lot of morons in the universe, and when they reincarnate here, it's like they're standing on their hind legs for the very first time, and they're happy to stay there.
I have a friend on this network who's very fond of saying that the world might be a lot better place if it weren't for bicycle helmets and Velcro shoes.
Listen, certain religious groups that are praying for the rapture, every time something happens, it's the end of the world. I pray for their rapture too, because I surely like to see them all get lifted off into space in group, in mass. And then I can just stand back and wave and say, so long, sucker.
And then we can heal these scars they have left behind ourselves.
Exactly. I tell people, if you want to believe in a sky god, you're welcome to do that. But this is America, where, as far as I know, people get sworn in on a Bible to uphold the Constitution. It's not the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
And, I just tell them, what ends that discussion is when I say, we have more pictures of UFOs than we do of God, right? That's good conversation ender.
That is definitely a room stopper right there. Because who can argue with you?
You can't. And it just so happens that even the Christian's God just happens to be white and a man. Okay. So I often say that man created God in his own image.
Man created
hateful, racist, women-hating God. And God, if that doesn't describe the Republican Party, I don't know who it describes.
The only time anybody hears me stumble on my show is when I have absolutely no retort for something. And do you hear this, guys? And like every 10 minutes, Maria's just hitting me with something else where I gotta go, yep.
Well, hey, they don't call me the mouth that roars for no reason.
Oh my. And I have enjoyed your work for a long time. I mean, you do a lot of different shows, besides your own thing. You appeared with Jack Blood, which is what really introduced you to me was Jack Blood. I know that probably sounds a little odd.
Jack and I do a show every month together. We have all these years. We call it Blood and Guts.
Right. I love that show. And I have, caught a lot of episodes of it. I mean, I can't say I catch everyone because, it's impossible for me to listen to everybody.
Well, just so your listeners know, they can go over to my website, maria.net, and I spell it MERIA. That last show I just did this week with Jack Blood was great. So I have that spinning at my free show link like 24/7. So they can go listen to Blood and Guts. And I do have a lot of our stuff together on YouTube also.
Oh, right. That's true. There's a bunch of stuff with Maria. As a matter of fact, if you just kind of kick around YouTube for a little bit just to get more of a feel for her stuff, she's all over the place. And now look, I know that everybody wants to talk about, how you agree with people and you disagree with people. But here's the thing. I knew this without even trying, without ever speaking to Maria. Her and I have never had a conversation, directly with each other until a few minutes before I hit the air tonight. But I knew this, that regardless of what each of us has unearthed in our time, we are definitely traveling on the same roads. And the roads that I see are the roads of honesty. And this is what this woman does. And I don't know how else to describe it outside of that, except to say that I can't stand the dishonest and deceptive people that are seemingly everywhere I turn. Right. And I know that
they have an agenda. I don't have any agenda. Okay, I've already lived my life. I could be like a lot of people my age and say, screw you, I had my life, I don't care. So I don't have an agenda. My son is always asking me, because I always have my neck in a noose doing something since he's a boy. And he's like, why is it always got to be you, Ma? You know, why is it always got to be you? You know, because he used to get really scared that somebody would try to take me out, you know, in some of the events that I've done. And I said, but who else is going to do this? I can read, I can write, and I can speak. So who else is going to do this? Because remember, Charles, when I started doing internet radio, most people's computers didn't even have speakers.
Right.
I only intended to do it for fun for a couple of months till I figured out what I wanted to do next. And doing it for fun, July, I start my 15th year on the net.
And that tells you something there. You know, I'm very sure though that what happened was as you started to do this stuff, you just couldn't stop because it was so voluminous. I mean, you know, if you really want to dissect things and you really want to, sort of attempt to educate those that you believe are worth saving, you know, this is what the point is. And this is why so many of us do try to make these efforts.
Absolutely. I do it for you. I do it for your kids. I do it for every kid I see on the street, you know, every young mother that I see pushing her baby. You know, I mean, I just want to shake them and say, this wasn't how the world was when I had my kids 40 years ago, you know, and, I do it also because my ex-husband used to call me Kate Loves a Mystery. Okay. I would solve crimes in our neighborhood that the police couldn't solve. And my curiosity keeps me going and I love to learn. And I often tell my listeners, I'm learning right alongside you. You know, life is all about learning. When you stop learning, you're dead.
You know, I didn't steal that from you, but believe me, I've said that many times on my show already. Listen, I'm going to learn right along with you guys tonight. Let's see what we can discover together, you know?
Well, I'm not surprised. Maybe you're my son from another life.
That could very well be true. You know, the spiritual side of things, is something that really attracts even more criticism than the analytical side of things. And I mean, I don't like to focus on the negative of people who criticize, you know, for the sake of criticizing. And I mean, individuals who just seem to have that as their agenda solely, you know, without regard to logic or without regard to the actual intent of what we're trying to present sometimes. Mm-hmm. But, you know, again, my feeling is that, and my experience is that because, and let me qualify that real quick. When I say my experience or my feeling, it is my perspective, not based on some sort of philosophical, you know, ideal that I've developed because I was bored one day, but these are my real observations, observations, from just simply interacting with the world around me. Mm-hmm. And what I see is that us as creatures, and I do say us as creatures, I'm not simply limiting this to the human form, but us as creatures, we are basically all part of a oneness that is the actual nature. In other words, the sort of landscape of the spiritual realm, which again, I hate when people say is supernatural, the real true nature of that side of life, which is beyond that which your eyes are allowed to capture. Mm-hmm. That is more about the whole, the collective of what is. It doesn't mean that we all melt into a singularity, but as separate voices, we are all already part of that singularity. And really all it is that we have denied that nature for so long that this is why there is a need to rediscover this. And if we don't rediscover that and understand that love is a real thing and that, you know, truly sympathizing and empathizing with your fellow creature is of the greatest value, I think that this is why we suffer.
Right. Well, you know, there are only two emotions in the world, fear and love. Every other adjective you're going to come up with is going to fit into one of those two categories. So I often tell people you have to decide when you're saying something or feeling something, is this coming from fear or is this coming from love? And if it's coming from fear, you need to switch course. Because we live in a world now where, let's face it, fear is everywhere. Fear and paranoia reigns. But you can still choose not to participate, because people say, how can you cover this news and what you know and all this and still be like, sane? Which, of course, I don't know. The jury's out on that one. But I tell them I choose not to participate. I can cover it, but I'm not going to participate. I'm not going to let it affect my daily life. I'm still going to be happy in my life. I'm going to hang out with my friends. I'm going to party. I'm going to go to the gym. I'm going to, water my lawn, whatever I have to do. Because, you can be here and still be separate from it. But if you get caught up in the fear of this world, then to me, that means your spiritual belief system is not working for you. Or you're not working it. You're trapped in the matrix.
That's it. Is you've lost touch with the real nature, the real wonder, and it's rather sad to me. I find a sadness when I can feel the fact that so many people are disconnected from themselves and are living in that secondary world, that secondary matrix, as it were.
But they're programmed that way. We're programmed from birth.
Oh, absolutely.
The bull crap starts the minute you're born. These are your parents. They're going to teach you your language. You're going to go to school. You're going to learn all this useless information, pack of lies. Then you're going to get a job. Then you're going to get married. Then you're going to have a family. Then you're going to die. And they think to basically tell you everything from the minute you're born. But you know what? I was one of those weird kids that could never understand why I had to do what everybody else was doing. And I was very fortunate that I had a father who reamed home to us every single day. Question everything, especially authority. And he did.
Absolutely. And, it is also remarkable to me because, you mentioned earlier, and I thought about it then, but neglected to mention it. You mentioned earlier that people who in the latter stages of their life cycle as a biological human, let's put it that way, seem to die earlier when they have less interaction with other people, when they have less happiness, when they have less love, really, in their lives, because happiness is also love.
Right.
The thing is, though, even this is not just present at the end of the life cycle. This is present throughout the life cycle. Your quality of life is literally affected by this from the moment you're born. Abandoned babies who were placed in hospitals used to die, and they studied this phenomenon.
Yes, they weren't being touched.
Because they simply weren't being touched, because their very most basic need to be a social creature, to interact and to have interactions with others, was not being fed. So what happens is, spiritually, they fully disconnect from their physical being and cease to live as a human creature. And that is not only, like I said, not only present at the end of this life cycle,
right,
but is present throughout.
Of course, the soul just says, that's it, I'm out of here, I'm not interacting, I'm going. A lot of people ask me, my opinion, and, I've been doing private counseling and consultations. I like to call them spiritual consultations, even though it's pretty much everything about life for, 30 years. And a lot of people have asked me, what makes a kid be born autistic? Okay, all right, now I have a whole lot of other reasons, especially after interviewing Dr. Andrew Wakefield on vaccines and autism. But back in the day, okay, when you were being born, Charles, it was very rare that there was an autistic kid. Very rare. And I had a niece who was. And I think the soul says, all right, I want to go back down to earth and have another lifetime. And then when they actually get in the body, they say, I think I'm going to skip this lifetime and I'm not going to participate. And they're gone. The body's still there moving around, but there's nobody home. But today, because autism is epidemic, I think it's 1 out of 40 kids or some ridiculous figure like that. You have to look at the genetically modified food, which is changing their DNA in collusion with the vaccines, in collusion with the chemicals in the water, in collusion with the chemtrails, to literally poison. I think they all work synergistically together. And that's why people are so sick.
That is the absolute, fact, and really that's the ball game right there. That's it. Is on every possible front where you could have a decent interaction between the physical world and the spiritual world. There are these barriers which are personified by these poisons in the food, the water, the air, the psychological stream, as it were. Every single possible front from which a human being could reach out into the world has been contaminated and damaged.
Well, and deliberately to shut off your pineal gland, which really is your third eye, which connects you to multi-dimensions and your spirituality. You know, when you look at the illegalization of cannabis, why do you think, people come up with a million reasons why pot is illegal. But the best answer I ever got was from a woman, believe it or not, older than me, Dr. Jean Shinola Bolin, who is very famous. She must have 1,000 books out. And I remember interviewing her, God, it had to be 10 years ago, and she was already in her 70s. And she's also a very spiritual woman, besides a very highly degreed psychologist. And she said they don't want to legalize marijuana because marijuana gives you that spiritual connection. And they don't want people having that connection with their spiritual self that you can get through marijuana, let alone the capability to think. I don't know about you, but if you were ever stoned and hanging out with your friends, I bet that's when you got the best ideas and you start really thinking about things and getting into deep conversation. Remember, they don't want a nation of thinkers in this country. They want a nation of worker bees. That was how they started our public education system. So anything that can cut you off from your spirituality is going to be illegal.
Right. I mean, well, let's just put it this way. I was a musician for about a decade, so.
Well, and I was an artist for many decades, so put it that way.
So we have an understanding then.
Absolutely. And you know what? I was around a lot of other artists because, I actually was quite famous as an artist. And then I said, okay, I succeeded at this. What's next? So I used to hang out with a lot of other famous artists in Soho in New York. And let me tell you, they had all kinds of drugs flowing. I mean, drugs that I don't even know what they were. But I always opted out, okay, because I always had my own connection to spirituality. I was able to think and act without drugs the way they could with drugs. And I'm not putting down them or, let's say, Carlos Castaneda. Okay, when I was younger and I read Castaneda's books, the only thing that bothered me was he had to take psychedelics in order to write. And I think it was like peyote and mushrooms or whatever, but to have his experiences. But I would read his books and say, but I can have these experiences without it. Why did he need that? I was young, so I was very judgmental. But as I got older, I realized, well, whatever works. If that works for him, it's no sweat off my back. What do I care?
Right. I mean, I spent time on the Jersey Shore and then in the East Village. So after spending time, and I mean, I was a stone's throw from Tompkins Square Park. You could step out onto my stoop and throw a rock to your left, and you could hit it.
All right.
And in that atmosphere, I never condemned anybody that, I mean, I experimented, obviously, but, obviously I say as if.
Well, I mean, that's a normal part of growing up. That's a normal part of, your teenage, early adult years.
Right. And
parents and they think their kids are, terrible dope fiends because they're smoking a joint. I'm like, hello, what did you do when you were 15?
Right. You got a hold of some other chemical to alter your mind and mood in order to achieve something at some point.
Right. Or you were sniffing glue. I mean, kids would do whatever the hell they wanted to do. You know what I'm saying? I had a lot of crazy friends doing a lot of crazy things. Even people used to get high on whiteout in my office. Okay. On the blue ink you had to use for a mimeograph machine. People would sniff that to get high. So, people are always going to want to get high. Whose business is it? Dolphins get high. Okay. Animals get high on different plants, on different kinds of weird looking fish. It's just part of being, a creature, as you call us creatures. I love that.
Yeah, that's definitely exactly. It's part of the condition of being a creature. Exactly.
Right. But now we have all these, sanctimonious, pasty-faced pigs in government who are going to tell us, they're going to push their morality on us when they have proven they have zero morality on what we can eat, drink, smoke, or whatever. Okay. And to me, who died and made them king?
Well, not only who died and made them king, but I mean, they're generally the biggest purveyors of poisons, narcotics,
right,
and everything that they're condemning. So the hypocrisy to me is the most astounding thing is that, let's just take note of that senator recently or congressman recently. I mean, there's so many of them, who knows which one I'm talking about, but hey, it doesn't matter. If you play this 2 years from now, I guarantee you've got a senator or a congressman who is caught up in some sex scandal, and generally he was one of the family values guys.
Well, look at that rich guy DuPont who got convicted of repeatedly raping his 3-year-old daughter through when she was 3 to 5. And because he's from the DuPont zillionaire family, the judge gave him probation because she said he wouldn't fare well in jail. Now, if that was, a black guy, on the streets of the Bronx who got busted for that, he'd be getting the death penalty.
Right.
So we have two sets of laws in this country, too. One for the elite, which I think is the scum of the earth, and one for the rest of us.
Right, and it's all flipped on its head because, you're right.
Up is down, down is up. You remember Deep Throat and JFK? White is black, black is white. Well, that's the world we live in.
We are through the looking glass, people.
It's just crazy when you look at it, but you know what? I can look at it and laugh. And because I can actually keep my audience laughing, giving them the worst possible news you could possibly hear. And I get comments from them all the time. Oh my God, Monday's news show was so strong, but I was hysterical laughing because I can't help but throw my snarky little sarcastic remarks into it because I'm not as stupid as they think I am. I'm not as dumb as they look. And so I don't buy their stories.
Yeah, see, that's the thing, and that was one of the only actual criticisms that I did get upset with is, when I made jokes on the air about a few things, I said, my response was this, the only way that I can point out the absurdity of this is to turn it into something that seems funny.
Yeah, because if you don't have a sense of humor, your head would blow off like Beetlejuice.
Right. I mean, even to just absorb, you could take any particular handful of years of the stuff that I've been absorbing just as a matter of being, some people call it being a news junkie. Some people call it being an information addict even. Have you ever heard those terms?
Yeah. Once in a while, if I'm too much, my friends will say, Maria, okay, we've had enough of this conversation. And I'll just say, okay, let's go to something else.
Well, but when you get that, right, the thing that's hysterical to me is that, you know what, if you process this stuff long enough, you're going to start to disseminate it in a couple of different ways. And at some points, really, if you took to heart every single thing and if you thought to yourself, on a very human level about the actual consequences of all these things that we're learning, you can't internalize it because if you did, I don't know of a single being, at least I don't know of a single being that is evolved enough to absorb the actual levels of evil that one could actually begin to, only touch that proverbial tip of the iceberg on.
All right. No, if you don't have a sense of humor, you're not going to survive this. And you have to have a strong spirituality to survive it. And on the other hand, it reminds me of that poster I see on Facebook every now and then. You may not care about politics, but politics cares about you.
Although politicians don't.
Right. But when people say, I'd rather people actually tell me I'd rather keep my head in the sand. And I said, well, then that assures you're going to suffocate. To me, that's just stupidity to me. We can't have a revolution unless we educate people.
Well, see,
That person needs the education we're giving them. We're doing it for them as a favor. Believe me, I'm not getting rich on this, and I'm sure you're not either.
Oh, absolutely not. And when I was a musician and just politically active on a very sort of cursory level, I mean, doing say benefit shows for Lifebeat or whatever it was I was doing, where I was trying to participate in doing something positive. A lot of people, even on those sort of very narrow issues, would come to me and basically say that they were more comfortable keeping their head stuck in the sand. And I used to reply to them, well, that's a good guarantee that you're going to get kicked in your ass.
Well, I just say it guarantees you'll suffocate. I mean, come on, get your head out of your ass and pay attention. Life is a participatory sport, okay? If you choose not to participate, then you're already dead. So why suck up any of the planet's resources? Why not just leave?
Oh.
Yeah. I mean, look, I know that's strong, and I know I heard your gasp, but I've always felt that way. If you're not willing to be a part of life and really fully participate, you're already dead. And I'll give you an example. I had an uncle who had a heart attack. Old Italian guy, right? He has a heart attack. My father had a heart attack. My father went back to work a week later. But this uncle was so fearful after he had his heart attack that he never left his apartment again, not even to go visit his children. And I remember one day having a conversation with him. I couldn't have been more than 20 years old, but I've always had quite the mouth on me. And I said to him, what's this crap that you're telling my aunt you can't get in the car and go visit your son? And he says, well, I'm afraid. What if I have a heart attack in the car? What if I this? What if I that? And I just looked at him and I said, you know what? You're already dead. So why don't you just lay down and die?
There you
and that's
go.
the end of that. That was another conversation stopper.
No, but there you go again, because after all, he was allowing fear to dictate his life. He was allowing fear.
No life. I mean, my father said, I guess I had a heart attack. What am I going to do? I still got to go to work. I got a family to support, and he still partied down. He was the original good time Charlie when it came to partying. He lived his life by his rules. Okay, maybe he would have lived an extra 10 years if he didn't drink so much, but hey, he had fun the whole time. So more power to him.
That's what I say. You certainly can't judge anybody unless you've done what they've done and seen what they've seen.
Absolutely. I mean, I often think about Dennis Leary. I'm sure you've heard some of his comedy.
Oh, yes.
But Dennis Leary's got a fabulously funny comedy he does on smoking, because he really is the king of chain smokers. And he has a skit on smoking that's hilarious. You should try to YouTube it. And he goes, okay, they say it's going to knock 7 years off your life. He goes, well, let's take a look at those last 7 years. And then he goes into a whole litany of, you're sitting in a wheelchair, somebody's feeding you soup with a spoon, you're wearing a Depends. He's like, I don't want those 7 years. I'm going to keep smoking. It's hilarious. And it's got to be at least 20 minutes long. I mean, you're laughing hysterically through the whole thing.
Well, right.
But the message is the same. Don't be afraid to live. Okay, none of us have guarantees. Why do we come to Earth in the first place and take a human body? Okay? Because we want to experience the pleasures of being human, and too many people have forgotten what those pleasures are. You want to eat, you want to drink, you want to smoke, you want to screw, okay? These are not things you can do when you're just a spirit floating around in the universe, okay? So you come down here and say, okay, I'm going to go to Earth like I'm visiting Disneyland, and I'm going to party and I'm going to live it up. But because there's so much fear and there's so much pressure, everybody gets caught in that. And they're too afraid to just have a good time. That's really why we're here. We're supposed to be having a good time. But if you ask people, Charles, are you having a good time? Watch the answers you'll get.
Oh, not many people are going to respond in the affirmative, that's for sure.
No, I mean, years ago, I lectured throughout the Southwest, and I opened up with, and it shocked some people in, backward states. I don't mean to judge them, but they are backward states. When I would just come out, look at the audience and say, F you, and then I would pause, and I could see the shock on their faces. And then I would say, N. Sometimes F you ends with the letter N. Had any lately? And there was a huge gasp, okay, a gasp of release would go through the crowd. And then I would ask them, okay, maybe a couple hundred people in the room. I would say, when's the last time any of you had fun? And not even 2 hands would go up out of 400 people. And then I would ask them, what is fun to you? And it was the deer in the headlights look. And, that's the problem with being human. People forget you're really here to enjoy your life. And I got to tell you, I enjoy my life every minute of the day. People say, why do you do what you do? Because it's fun. I enjoy it. It's fun. I'm good at it. Okay. It's what I'm good at. If I get bored with it, that's when I change careers. I've done that many times in my life. Mm-hmm. So, even when I talk to, kids getting ready to go to college or whatever, and they're like, I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. I don't know what I want to do for a living. And I say, guess what? You could change what you do for a living 3, 10, 20 times. You don't have to make that decision now. Your life can change anytime you want it to.
Right. And, this goes along with the, the thing that used to be asked of me a lot, because, I did, sort of performance pieces sometimes where, I interacted with the crowd, which was unique with me, as a musician. And, people would say to me all the time, aren't you afraid that, you're going to get hurt really bad? Aren't you afraid of the people? Aren't you afraid of, jumping into, say an audience pit, which I had done in South America several times, where, thousands of kids would come out to see just about anything. Mm-hmm. And I had jumped into places where nobody was going to speak my language. Nobody would have heard my cries for help probably, or anything else, had something gone wrong. And people would say, well, aren't you afraid to die? Aren't you afraid that you're going to get hurt? And I said, listen, the one guarantee that every single one of us has is that this particular life cycle is going to end.
Right.
And I'm not going to sit here and be afraid for the remainder of the time that I am in this particular cycle, because I'm going to waste the time that I have.
Exactly. Well, my dad used to say, you're born to die or yesterday, but we're all going to die. And one of the things he taught us when we were young was, don't fear any man, because they can only kill your body. They can't touch your soul. So he basically raised, 6 fearless daughters, or as they used to call us, John Rubino's boys. So we were all unique in our own way.
See, and that's the thing, is that the ability, and it is a lost art among people. And this is, I do feel sad though for those who have, completely lost their, ability to act in a fearless way, to act without fear, to be without fear, to love without fear, to extend yourself to even a single human being. I mean, even their children, their wives, their supposed friends and everything else around them, they don't extend themselves. They don't participate. They don't act without such consternation, such terror.
They're not honest. They're not honest with each other. And that's a question I had with one of my guests a few months ago. And it's an interesting question, one you may want to ponder with your friends, because I spent days torturing my friends over this one to try to get an answer. She said, when you have a best friend, you can love that friend 100%. You're always 100% yourself. You can tell them anything and everything. Why is it you can't do that with your partner? It's a good one. It was a mind bender for me for quite a few days. And I tortured all my friends with that. And I said, how can you be this way with me, but you're not fully you when you're with your husband or when you're with your wife?
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing. And I mean, you
would think in a relationship, that's the way you'd want to be with your husband or wife or, partner, if you're same sex, but most people are not. What changes what does change? What makes that difference between you being yourself, say with your brother, your sister, or your best friend, and yourself with your partner?
Yeah, see, I always experience the sort of opposite. And, it's that, again, the fear, and in some cases it's the fear of rejection, I guess. I experienced these things as a child, but once I was done with, childish things, I did try to put them away. And, one of those things certainly was, not allowing myself to be part of what it is that I was searching. If I wanted a partner who was going to be completely, part of me and actually be at one with me the majority of the time. I could not possibly expect that unless I was willing to do that. You know, this is the type of things that I went through, as I grew up. And I mean, it definitely, even though some people think that kind of thing will complicate your life, it doesn't. It actually simplifies it.
Absolutely. It makes it easier to just always be yourself.
It's a lot, you know, if you do allow, yourself to be yourself and you allow yourself to change also. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to, adopt a particular set of rules for yourself or anything else. But I mean, the simple act of being, is something that, I mean, in our language, it's hard to really, to really describe that, I think, because it seems to fall flat when you say, no, you don't have to act all the time. Sometimes you just have to be. Mm-hmm. And it does seem to fall flat, and some people think that that's just, new age nonsense. That's, sort of part of the trendy, way of thinking, or the trendy sort of,
but it really isn't. It's really not trendy. You know, when I went to high school, I went to high school in Brooklyn, and my high school was, believe it or not, Thomas Jefferson High. And in the foyer, when you first walk into the school, every single day, there was a huge statue of Thomas Jefferson. And underneath it, carved out in the marble, it said, to thine own self be true. So I saw that all day long, changing classes or whatever, to thine own self be true. So that's not a new concept. It's not a metaphysical woo-woo concept, okay? Thomas Jefferson said that, and then you hear, some of the great poets, to be or not to be, the entire sentence, I am. Finished. That's the end the sentence, I am. But we're taught, again, we go back to being programmed. We're programmed from when we're kids to never think about ourselves. That's selfish. You're here to serve. You need to do for everybody else. And we and our needs get lost in the shuffle.
And yeah, that is again, another, I mean, I don't know how many truths you're going to lay on me here.
I don't know how long we got.
We got, I could go another half hour with you if you want, and I'm so much enjoying this. You don't even know. Because, it is so good to it's always enjoyable to be able to converse with someone who is honest and actually truly, and I hate the term, but, this is somebody who's actually awake, ladies and gentlemen. This is what you're listening to.
That I am. You know what? I got 2 huge compliments in the years I've done my show, and I've gotten a lot, and I've also gotten a lot of death threats and ugly name calling thrown my way, which I'm from Brooklyn. I could give a crap less what anybody says. But threats don't really bother me. It's like, yeah, I can go home. But one was, I don't know if you remember the producer, Aaron Russo.
Oh, yes.
He did the movie From Freedom to Fascism, and I met Aaron a few times. And unfortunately, he died before I got him on my show. But I did get a note from his handler when he crossed, and he said, Maria, one thing that Aaron always said about you, he says, Maria Heller has integrity. Now, to me, that's a huge compliment, because that's something my father always insisted on, being a person of integrity. The other one was the author of that Jefferson book that put together all those quotes. And he said to me while I was interviewing him, and it took him 7 years to put these quotes together in a cohesive form where you have Jefferson's thinking on every topic in one place. He said, Maria, your show is very Jeffersonian in nature. And I said to him, well, what do you mean by that? And he said, if Jefferson was alive today, he'd be doing what you're doing. Now, I can't get better compliments than that. It's not why I do what I do. We already went there. Mm-hmm. But if you don't have integrity, and it's easy to see the people that don't have integrity, they're always screaming, even if they say they're alternative media, they're also creating fear. They're just coming at it from the other side of fear, but it's fear. It's screaming. It's yelling. You have to stock up. You got to save your family's life. You got to do this. You got to do that. It's like 2 sides of the same coin. And let's not forget, they're rolling in dough. Okay. They're mostly bankrolled by, the Ford Foundation, the big gold companies, the Koch brothers. So to come across somebody that recognizes truth, and I've always argued this, even with the kid that started me on the show, he said, Maria, people will never pay to listen to your show. And I said, you're wrong. People will pay if they know it's truth, because I don't want to have commercials. I don't want anybody censoring me. I don't want any corporate backing. I says, I believe that people will recognize truth and support it. And they do. It's not the majority of people, but I'm not here for them. Do you know what I'm saying? I don't care about them. I care and I don't care. Think about that one. Okay. I care and I don't care.
No, I share your duality on that emotion. I'm sorry, I do.
Oh, okay. So you understand.
Yes.
I tell people, one of the greatest books ever written was Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. He wrote it in 1936. And I've read it many times. I'm currently rereading it because he was an extremely spiritual man, even though they downplay that side of him. But he said two things in the same book that you would think were contradictory. He said, do everything as if it really matters, because it does. And then in the same book, he said, ultimately, nothing matters. And for a long time, I thought that was, that just didn't make any sense. But then as I got older and more experienced, I realized exactly what he had said. Put 100% into whatever you're doing, because it matters. Yeah, it matters. It matters to you. But ultimately, nothing matters, because you're going to leave this planet, and who's going to remember you? Do you know what I'm saying?
No, you know what? Exactly. It matters to you. It matters to your children. It matters to the people that you interact with. It matters to your friends, to your family. But, the truth of the entirety of the situation is that one day that sun up there is going to burn out too. Mm-hmm. And both things are very true.
Right. And sometimes when I get really passionate on my show, or as my kids say, oops, mom's going real Sicilian right now. I am passionate, but I'm also dispassionate. I'm passionate when I'm delivering it, but then when the show is over, it left me. It's gone. Do you know what I mean? I don't hold on to it because it matters and it doesn't matter.
Oh, right. I mean, I get into a different sort of, energy state when I do this show, certainly. And it's observed, my current wife definitely sees it. She doesn't know what to make of it. She says, you're not even the same person when you go on that show, but you are. And I said, exactly.
And you're channeling your higher self.
I'm trying to anyway. I don't always succeed.
You're at your absolute best. I would suggest that everybody listening go over to YouTube. If you're going to look at anything of mine, look at my lecture that I did on 9/11. And I think it's just called Maria Heller at 9/11 conference or whatever. That lecture took me 3 months to write. And I would say it's probably the best piece of work I've ever done. And once I lectured in front of several thousand people, as soon as I was done, my entire body started shaking. I mean, uncontrollably shaking, because that energy coming through me almost knocked me out. Was it a spirit from woo-woo land? Hell no. It was my higher self. I mean, I was on, and I mean, I always get a standing ovation, but I was giving a very serious lecture on 9/11 and having people laugh. I can teach them to remember those points through humor by showing how ridiculous the story was. So I'm not surprised. I mean, listen, my office, when I'm delivering my news show, my office temperature goes up about 10 degrees. And it's not because I have the thermostat on. It's just the energy coming off my body.
Right. And this is, sort of the harmonic coexistence of our beings actually beginning to rattle the physical. That's really what it is. I mean, the same thing. I know I keep saying this to you, but I also find it funny, by the way, that you do realize that my last name is a Sicilian name also, right?
Well, Ochelli. Ochelli. How do you pronounce it? Do you pronounce it Italian, Ochelli?
Yes.
Okay. How many people murder your last name on a regular basis?
Oh, Lord. I've been Ochelli, I've been Ochelli, I've been Ochelli.
You know, a lot of people say to me, "Oh, she's," you know, I've been called some pretty ugly things, especially by people that hate Jews. And I don't really hate anybody except the world leaders. And they'll say, "Oh, you know, she says she's Italian, but she's not Italian. She's a Jew," because my name is Heller. But, you know, I worked under my married name for 20 years. I mean, nobody would know me under my maiden name. And as I told my ex-husband, I said, I'm keeping the name because I put the hell in Heller.
Well, that was the weird thing that came across in one of the emails, because I had let a couple of people know in alternative circles that you were going to be on. And one of the weirdest things I got back is, "Oh, this ought to be interesting because both of you actually have the word hell in your names."
Well, my mother used to say there is no hell, this is it. And I think she was right.
I believe that your mom was definitely onto something there.
Right. She was as Sicilian can get.
Sounds very much like the kind of things my grandfather used to say to me in broken English, yes.
Yeah, but you know what? The older I get, the smarter my parents become.
This is true too. And your grandparents too. If you talk to them, I bet you.
Well, they've been long gone. But, you know, I say, wow, you know, I used to think this and that, or that my parents were nuts. But the older you get, the longer you live, you say, wow, they were geniuses.
But yeah, not only that, but I mean, you begin to see that, you know, some of the things that you were being taught were insane or bizarre when you were younger seem to be a little bit more part of the reality than
well, you know what? I was very fortunate because I had a father who was a free thinker and he encouraged us to be that way. So every time he got called up to school, because we were supposed to be berated, you know, I would take the teachers on. I would say, you know, what you're teaching us is bullshit. You know, that's not true. And of course, you know, they would call my parents up to school, and my father always defended us. And he would demand that I present the counter argument to the teacher in class, to the point where she had to say yes. And because I was, you know, school was very easy for me, so they couldn't kick me out because my grades were too high. So I got away with a lot of stuff other people wouldn't. But I can't just sit there and listen to lies. I mean, it's not my nature to just sit there quietly and say, I'm not going to say anything, because my mouth just goes. It has a mind of its own.
Oh yeah. I'm with you there. I mean, you know, you were talking about marijuana before. You know what I noticed recently is now there is another rise in the propaganda about marijuana, and now it's you know how we have the headline news, and I do so despise having to actually monitor this thing. But, you know, cause I've said this several times too, I can't figure out what the hell is wrong with Nancy Grace's head. But something is. And I don't just mean on the inside or the outside, I'm talking both, people. Something is wrong there. But either way, on the headline news channel lately, there have been a collective of these anti-marijuana. Look, you know, in Colorado, they've legalized marijuana, so look at how evil it is. Oh my, people are doing dumb things and this and that and the third thing. And I was sitting there with somebody who I would have to say, unfortunately, is not very awake. But they looked at me and they said, what do you make of that? And I said, well, it doesn't really matter if they were smoking weed or not. They were stupid to begin with, is probably what the case is. And that's the end of the story. And I don't know why they're even wasting these 15-minute clips on this.
Right. Well, because they're probably advertising a lot of pharmaceuticals. Remember, who's fighting legalization the most? But pharmaceutical companies and the beer lobby.
Well, right, because again, you're not allowed to poison yourself unless it's an approved and taxed and,
you know, poison. Right. Yeah. They know, you know, look, Colorado has already proven that it's a wonderful tax revenue for the state. The crime has not gone up like everybody thought it was going to, because they all watched that Reefer Madness one time too many. So, you know, it's just BS. And to me, you know, I just tell people, if it's a plant, eat it. If it's made in a plant, don't. And I feel the same way about smoking. Okay. You want to smoke crack, some man-made poison drug, or these new Chinese drugs that you can buy over the counter in a smoke shop? Or do you want to smoke a plant that God gave you to transcend? To me, it's a no-brainer.
Oh yeah, for sure. And
now you can see how many beers, and you know, I don't like beer, but if somebody wants to drink a beer, what do I care? But how many beers now have been exposed as being genetically modified beer? Okay.
Right.
So what are you going to do? You better start figuring out how to make your own beer, because they're just going to poison people no matter which way they can do it.
Well, right. And then as soon as they got the idea that that might happen, of course, the chemtrails get ramped up. I am also astounded by that too, because, that was supposed to be, again, I always have to apologize to some of these guys that I was always told were wearing the tinfoil hats.
Yeah.
Right. Because the people that were saying, look, they're spraying us. I mean, I think it was, well, let me think about this a minute. I don't remember which black leader it was who at one point was screaming about magnesium being sprayed over neighborhoods, black neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm.
And this is going to be one of the harder things that I'm going to say on here. And I know it's going to be taken a little roughly, but, the fact is that when people talked about, well, they're doing this to the minority neighborhoods, they're doing this to the N-word neighborhoods, all that kind of stuff. Let's get to the reality here. As far as the controllers of the system are concerned, there is no difference between us, them. This division is only there in order to divide us.
Right. The division is between the rich and the poor. And to them, we're all the poor.
And, and I always found this rather profound, although it's from a strange place. But, shock rocker Marilyn Manson in one of his songs, repeats over and over again that everybody is someone else's nigger. And that, to me, is one of the most profound things that you could possibly, attribute to that.
Right. Well, long before your day, and a lot of people have forgotten it because it wasn't, one of his more popular tunes. John Lennon had written a song called "Woman is the Nigger of the World."
Mm-hmm.
And I refer to that often on my show because I don't see anything wrong with saying that word, because to me, the song was true. And, to me, if you're going to depict a people like that, I got to tell you, I find that in all races. Okay. But, everything now has to be politically correct. But when you look at, he sang that song in the 60s, and you look at now at this Christian wrong, as I like to call them, shutting down women's options, saying, if you're going to get raped, lay back and enjoy it. Close your legs, shut it down. You're not going to get contraceptives. You're not going to have availability to abortion. You're not going to have equal pay with men. I mean, and then they want to say there's no war on women. And I'm looking at all these atrocities. 350 anti-abortion laws passed last year by these pasty-faced male Republicans. And I often go back to the 60s. We had it going on for a while. And we would have succeeded had Nixon not coerced the hippie movement, people getting, get stoned, Timothy Leary, tune in, tune out, all this. But we did make a big attempt at changing that, at changing this world. But when I look at it now and how further back they're pushing women, that's my daughter, that's my granddaughter's. Okay. I fought long and hard for Roe versus Wade in 1973. Women are always going to have abortions. They need to have safe abortions. But it's not just that. But when you look at it, it really, like we started out at the beginning of the show, Charles, when I said to you, we are not evolving as a human race. We're devolving. We're becoming something that I don't want to be around for.
Right. I can't argue with you, except that I will say this. The warfare on women is only one theater of battle. There is a war on against men just as well. And, it's from a different angle. It's more about the castration and the disconnection of the real male, characteristics of the species.
Right. The whole gizmo is gone.
Right.
Look at the sperm count of American men, how it's dropped. I had a report, probably a week or two ago, that a lot of men are becoming sterile, their sperm count dropping because of their cell phones, carrying their cell phones in their pockets. I look at, garter kill, as I like to call it, all these different drugs they're putting our kids on, the drugs in the food. I think their goal is to sterilize everybody. But we can go even further to this war, that war on men, war on women, war on blacks, war on the poor, war on drugs. But the number one war, there is a war going on for our souls.
Exactly where I was going.
Well, there you go. Well, I guess you could just talk to yourself then for the rest of the show.
I would, but you know what? You actually, you're one of the few people that I know can say pretty much what I'm saying, but do it better. So
I only have a few years experience on you, so that has to count for something.
I only hope one day to evolve to the same level that you're at when it comes to this stuff, man. I'll tell you.
Hey, you're pretty much well on your way, Charles, for somebody your age to be this hip and this knowledgeable and this passionate. It's refreshing to see.
Well, I thank you for that. I really do, because, like I said, it is kind of new, for me to get out and do it this way. I tried to go at it a couple of different ways, and it just seemed to me as though no matter what I tried to learn, there was always another side to it. There was always, the hidden sort of agendas of others that seemed to constantly, contaminate what was supposed to be honesty among people. And this is what disturbed me more than anything.
Yeah, but you have to lose that emotions. You go back to the teaching of Buddha. When I was young and I was studying Buddha's writings, I was like, okay, this doesn't make any sense at all. He's saying that we have to detach from our emotions. But everything that I had learned spiritually was that we're here because of our emotions, to experience emotions. So it took me a long time to understand what he meant, that we have to have detachment where our emotions are concerned. So I'm going to save you about 20 years, Charles, and tell you what he meant. What he meant was to not let your life be dictated by your emotions. To be able to be in control of your emotions instead of your emotions controlling you. And then all these liars and two-facers and people with two different, sides to them or what, they don't bother you anymore because they want to get an emotional rise out of you on a base animal level. But you can teach yourself not to let your emotions dictate your life. Still have them. You want to go home and kiss and love your wife, kiss your kids and be happy, be sad, be glad, whatever. That's great. The difference is not letting your life be controlled by it.
It sounds like experience, but don't allow the experience to consume you. Pretty much,
pretty
is
much
what you're saying.
Right. I mean, and he had the same lesson of detachment from material things. And today, a lot of people are so attached to their material things that their material things own them.
Well, another friend of mine on this network is often says this, and I think he got it from somewhere else, but I love it. It's absolutely instructional and completely without flaw, in my opinion. And that is that people have now gotten themselves to a point where they are loving things and using people, and things are meant to be used and people are meant to be loved, and we need to get back to that.
Absolutely.
Like I say, I mean, again, I'm not necessarily the originator of these thoughts, but I got to tell you, when I hear them, they ring in my being.
Well, that's because there really is only one truth. And people that could connect to that universal bank of knowledge are all going to say the same thing. They may say it in a different way, but it's always the same truth.
That is it. That is absolutely it. I mean, there is one world, there is one reality, there is one being, and we are all part of it. And the sooner that we get back to being, to be, as soon as we get back to that state of to be, I think every single creature among the wilderness will be much better off for it.
Absolutely.
So look, Maria, we're running low on time, but I do want to make sure that we mention, of course, there's maria.net and all of the wonderful stuff you do. We talked about Blood and Guts, but you also do stuff with Tragedy and Hope.
Oh, yeah, Richard Grove will be back on the show. I was the first one to break Richard Grove's story on 9/11. by the way, when all the other supposed 9/11 truthers ignored him and his work. And after I blasted Richard's information on 9/11 over the internet, it burned my service for 2 weeks. Everybody wanted Richard on their show after that. And I actually tell them off in one of my 9/11 speeches. From the stage, I'm looking at everybody and I'm like, okay, for all you people that he sent this work to that ignored him, shame on you. And the audience got quiet like church. And I said, just so happens that young man is here today and he got a standing ovation. You know, I trust my gut on the stories I go with, my positions on the stories. You know, I always tell people I may not always be right, but I'm never wrong. You know, sometimes, you know, I may end up having a little spat even with one of my favorite co-hosts. And I've got, you know, I've got 5 or 6 of them. But we agree to disagree and we do it as grown-ups. We will never attack each other. And I think there's too much of that going on in the truth movement. If we can't get along, then we're never going to achieve anything.
Right. I mean, and again, this is one of the things that I echo as well, where I say that, you know, if we don't learn to stand together, regardless of what particular part of the ground we stand on,
we'll fall together.
We shall certainly fall together.
Right.
That's a guarantee.
Just so your audience knows, you know, I've got over 1,000 hours on my site that they can listen to. There's no commercials. I ask you for 50 cents a day. It's $15 a month for total access 24/7. I do 4 shows a week. You know, I have to tell you that I have the best people on in the world. You know, I haven't had to go looking for a guest since 2002. I mean, I'm constantly bombarded because my show has that reputation. And Charles, for the same reason you see it in me, and I'm honored that you said that to me. People know that they can trust me. My audience is, you know, they're a bunch of activists, you know, they're really great people. And, I like what I do. You know, I do work with people on one-on-one too. You know, that's how I support myself. And I'm happy to help anybody that feels they need it. You know, that's what we're here to do.
That's, you know, again, that's the ball game. Basically, you know, we're here, to be.
Right.
And we are not meant to be, as singular, separated, entities. We are all meant to be together in one way or another. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to, you know, connect with every single person on the planet. But like you were saying earlier, you know, you can sort of recognize your own, and it does sound a little tribal, but
you need that solidarity. You need to know you're not the only person out there that thinks this way. Because the world is set up to make you feel like you're the odd og. But there are a lot of other people that are in unison with you, whatever your spirituality is, your political views, etc. That's your soul group. Find them, hold on to them, never let them go. And
it is also very worthy of note that, you know, most of the system, and I do mean, well, let's go past that. Nearly all of the system, which has been erected to take us away from being ourselves, is meant to be adversarial, is meant to put us at odds, and is meant to propagate war in one way or another.
Exactly. Their whole goal is divide and conquer. So if you're going to get all hot and bothered under, you know, 1 issue, 2 issues, 3 issues and let it split you apart, remember that the controllers are laughing all the way to the bank.
Right. And I mean, the more that we argue with ourselves, the more we're actually serving their purposes as opposed to our own.
Absolutely.
And that is probably the most necessary message that I hope that our discussion has at least furthered a little bit. It may only be my voice out there in the ocean. I don't mind being a raindrop in the ocean because eventually the tides will change. So, this is definitely where I'm at. And, you know, again, we're winding down, but I cannot thank you enough. Ms. Heller.
Thanks.
That's a little joke between us because, at one point I sent an email to Maria and I said, Mrs. Heller, and she immediately wrote back and said, I'm not married. You can just say Ms.
Hey, it took a lot of time and money to get rid of Mr. Heller.
So you've earned that
That's
MS.
right. I earned that title. Hey, look, I'm too wild a child to be tied down to one person, and obviously marriage wasn't for me. I belong to the world, and there you go.
That's it. That's it.
I'm on a mission from God.
Thank you, Maria. Everybody, have a
At the age of 19 in 1962, she was
See, but I have the files. You know, I read this stuff at the National Archives, and I read these other things. I said to myself, how can that be possible? The brain, you know, pistols and the fondle slab of choice, I don't know, computers, internet, professional wrestlers, and not just even tourist style. It doesn't matter where the cartoon comes from as long as it's real. It doesn't. It's hard to get real information because seriously,